Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming along this evening to this hustings event. It's an unusual hustings event because you may have noticed that there's people with cameras and microphones, and that's because we're recording this event for Pulse 98.4 Community Radio, which is why I'm sitting in this position tonight. My name's Raymond Weir. I'm the chairperson of Pulse Community Radio, and occasionally I do a bit of presenting as well. So I drew the short straw and they made me do this tonight. None of them wanted to do it. You're kidding on. I'm kidding on, because they all wanted to do it. I'll give you an idea of the format tonight. I'm going to introduce the candidates shortly, and then each of the candidates is going to give you a 2-minute introduction to themselves and their party and their party's policy. The thing that's sitting in front of me here is a digital clock, and at the end of the 2 minutes, if they haven't stopped speaking, a big hook comes out from behind the stage and pulls them off. If you believe that, you believe anything. No, I will remind them that they've come to the end of their time, so they're going to get a 2-minute introduction. So the Pulse 98.4 Community Radio is based in Barrhead, for those of you who don't know, and we've been on the air live and local as a full-time station since the summer of 2009. And what we're doing, we're recording this show tonight, and if you want to hear it, you'll be able to listen tomorrow at 8 o'clock, Neil, is that right? 8 o'clock tomorrow evening? 8 o'clock tomorrow evening on Pulse 98.4, so you can get that on your radio and also on your computer if you go to the website pulseonair.co.uk. You can also listen to it on your phone, but I don't understand any of that stuff, so I don't know how to explain that to you. So the candidates will introduce themselves, they'll give a 2-minute speech each, then we're going to take some questions. Now, some of the questions have already been submitted, some of them through the local high schools, through Barrhead High and from St Luke's, and some of them have been submitted by Pulse listeners. But you will be free to come up with a question yourself if you feel that you want to probe any one of the candidates. And my job here is to try and make sure each person gets the same amount of time to answer the questions, and also to make sure that you and the audience get the chance to have a say if you feel you want to give someone a grilling or whatever you want to do. So, without any further ado, let me introduce the candidates. On the far side of the table, we have Robbie Simpson. Robbie is the Lib Dem's list candidate for Ayr. He's a university tutor and research student in computing science at the University of Glasgow, and Robbie has also held research posts in London and Geneva, so he's widely travelled. London, Geneva, Neilston, there's a ring to that, isn't there? So thanks for coming along tonight, Robbie. Councillor Gordon McCaskill, some of you may know from Mr McCaskill is from the Conservative Party. His Twitter feed describes him as a man of the people, a councillor, a historian, a bon vivant, a raconteur and wit. And I was really impressed when I went on his Twitter feed when he named his band that's playing up in heaven, because he named, a couple of days ago, he picked this band of dead musicians, and he got one for each instrument. He had David Bowie, he had Lemmy, he had Glenn Fry, Keith Emerson, and the one that impressed me most of all is he had a drummer. He had Dale Griffin. Now, only people of a certain age will know who Dale Griffin was the drummer with. Anyone in the audience know that? Mott the Hoople. See, you had to be someone of a certain age to know that, but well done, Gordon, for naming him in your band. Immediately on my right, we have Tom Arthur from Renfrewshire South. Tom is the candidate for the Scottish National Party. He's born in Paisley, educated in Barrhead. Since graduating from university, Tom has worked as a company director, a freelance piano teacher and keyboardist, and he's performed across Scotland and the UK at a range of private and corporate events. So if the worst comes to the worst and the microphones break, if there's a piano backstage, maybe Tom will be able to give us a wee tune. Fantastic. On my left we have Michael Burrows, who... oops, is that still working there? Is it back on now? Okay, thank you. On my left, immediately on my left, we have Michael Burrows, who's a list UKIP MP for the West of Scotland. He was inspired by the independence referendum to join UKIP. He's currently a social sciences student with no particular career in mind. He's a former goalkeeper with Guruk Youth Athletic Club. Is that true? So if we get a five-a-side team going here tonight, right? Michael's going to be in goals. And he was also the youngest candidate in the last election. Next to Michael, we have Veronika Tudhope. I was going to say Tudhope, because that's what it looks like, it's Tudhope. Veronika very correctly pointed out backstage. Veronika Tudhope is from the Green Party, West of Scotland, the list Central Ayrshire seat. Veronika says she's looking to fight for good housing, stable jobs and opportunities in education. I read an interview that Veronika did with a newspaper a couple of months ago in which she said that her ideal dinner party guest would have been Barack Obama. Now, I'm not sure whether she'd be at the front of the queue or the back of the queue, for the audience with Barack, but maybe we'll find that out in the course of the discussion. On the far side is Councillor Paul O'Kane, who many of you know, who's the Labour candidate. Born and raised in Neilston, he's been a councillor since 2012. He's the candidate for Renfrewshire South, but by far his greatest achievement, I feel, and I'm sure Paul would agree with me, is that he was the head boy in his 6th year at St Luke's. So thanks to our panellists, and I hope we're going to have an interesting discussion over the next hour or so. So we're going to start off with the 2-minute introduction, and we have drawn lots backstage, but and that's how we decided the seating order as well. And the first person to speak for 2 minutes will be Robbie Simpson on behalf of the Lib Dems.
Thank you. So at this election, the Liberal Democrats are offering a bold, positive change to get Scotland fit for the future. Now, the future of the country is going to be our young people, and they deserve the best education that we can provide so that everyone can fulfil all their potential. And that's why we're putting education at the very heart of our manifesto for these elections. We have announced bold plans to transform Scottish education in the next 5 years. We want to spend £500 million extra every year on investing in education. Because we need to tackle the educational performance, because children from poor backgrounds, from poor areas, are still too far behind, are still retaining much poorer grades than those in more affluent backgrounds. Targets in nursery places have been missed, and there's been 150,000 places cut out of our colleges. Schools are facing cuts because their local councils have been singled out for a £500 million cut from the SNP government. So we have a simple 4-point plan to transform Scottish education. Firstly, we're going to create a Scottish pupil premium for every child from a poor background wherever in Scotland they live. So we're going to give money, £900 for primary schools, £1,400 per pupil for secondary schools, to the head teachers, because they know in their schools what is going to work and where they can spend it where they wish to make the most difference, and helping children in their schools that are struggling, well, everybody in all the classes to learn better. And secondly, we're going to massively expand free nursery education and childcare. We're going to provide an early education place for every 2-year-old, and we're going to double the childcare allocation of hours for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And that will make sure that every child is ready to succeed when they get to school. Thirdly, we're going to reverse education cuts to council budgets. Half of what councils do is education, and that's why we need to protect their budgets from large cuts from Hollywood. And fourthly, we'll support our colleges. The SNP have cut 150,000 places in Scottish colleges in the last Parliament. So we're going to reverse those cuts, bring those places back, and bring in more practical courses to help people train for their careers. So, how are we going to pay for all this? How are we going to pay for this transformation? Because we're going to ask everybody, everyone in the country, everyone here, to pay just a little bit more so we can transform our country's future. We're going to put 1 pence on income tax, and that's going to raise £500 million every year, which we can invest in transforming education. And we'll use the new powers that the Scottish Government is obtaining to invest in our country's future. That's the way, that's the fair way, and that's how we're going to build a stronger, fairer Scotland.
Thank you, Robbie. The next candidate to speak will be Gordon McCaskill on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Gordon McCaskill, and I'm here representing Ruth Davidson and the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. A little background on myself. I'm a retired police officer who was elected as a Conservative councillor for East Renfrewshire in 2007, and I am now Deputy Leader of the Conservative group on the council. For the last 4 years, this country has been going through the longest political campaign in history, with the referendum followed by the general election and followed by the Scottish election this year. And I have to tell you that people are fed up to the back teeth with electioneering. The fact of the matter is that for the last 9 years, this country has been governed by a pressure group who are good at campaigning and are good at nothing else. In 2007, they got lucky. In 2011, they got very lucky. And in 2014, at the referendum, got very unlucky. Since then, they have had to start acting like a government and have been found wanting in either experience or maturity, and it is starting to show. To give just a couple of examples, it has taken 9 years for the Scottish Government to realise that education in Scotland is on a downward spiral. It has taken this long to come up with a national improvement framework to which Nicola Sturgeon has attached her entire political credibility. It will not work. Quite simply, too many councils have neither the staff, the training, the capacity or the money to make it work. And a rapid injection of £100 million from the Scottish Government at the fag end of 9 years is an act of desperation which is too little, too late, in either the medium or the short term. It is why the National Improvement Framework is voluntary. Not because councils don't want to sign up to it, but because they are physically incapable of signing up to it. Secondly, the SNP's named person scheme is quite simply the most egregious piece of legislation ever envisaged by a so-called democratic government. What it says is this: the Scottish Government is better able to look after your children than you are. It is a patent nonsense. However, what will happen is that every single child in this country under the age of 18 will be on a database whereby, if your children are not taught well-being and spirituality, despite the fact that the Scottish Government has not told us what well-being or spirituality legally means, it is an outrageous interference in parental responsibilities and family life, and it will not stand. I put it to you that this SNP government has to be held to account. If opinion polls are to be believed, then they will form the government for another 5 years. 5 years of yet more disgraceful legislation. 5 years of tax rises to pay for their disgraceful legislation. 5 years of yet more threats of an independence referendum. It is time for you, the voter, to say enough is enough. It is time for you to vote Conservative so that their feet can be held to the fire. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Next to speak is Tom Arthur on behalf of the Scottish National Party.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Thank yourself and Pulse for the invitation to come along this evening. And importantly, I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out in this lovely spring evening, a rare thing for us, but to come along and take part. Over the past 6 months, it's strange to believe, the last 6 months I've been speaking to people across Renfrewshire South. I've spoken with thousands of people across this constituency, and you know, across the various communities, we're not without our challenges, we're not without our problems. But one of the things that struck me speaking to so many people is the talent, the imagination, the creativity and the ideas of our people in Renfrewshire South. If you factor in the fact that we're located on the edge of one of Europe's largest and most dynamic cities, and we have an international airport on our doorstep, and we're only an hour's drive from some of the most spectacular landscapes in the world, we have boundless potential. I'm standing to be your local MSP because I want to work with groups across Renfrewshire South to unleash that potential and to see Renfrewshire South flourish. But the decision next week isn't just about choosing who you want your local MSP to be. It's about choosing who you want to be in government for the next 5 years, who you think is credible, who you think is competent, and who you trust to be in government. There's only one party who in this election has consistently stood on a platform for government. There's only one party who isn't saying our aim is to be the opposition, and that's the SNP. So if you want to see a strong local voice for Renfrewshire South, if you want to see a strong, united SNP government, and if you want to see Nicola Sturgeon back as First Minister, then a week tomorrow you need to vote both votes SNP.
Thank you, Tom. Next to speak will be Michael Burrows on behalf of UKIP.
Well, thank you very much to Pulse and to everyone who's turned out this evening. I must start by confessing I was contacted about this hustings at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I've negotiated every back road between here and Greenock to actually come here this evening. So I do apologise if I'm slightly ill-briefed. I would just start by saying it appears they've been sent the wrong bio. I was studying social sciences. I'm now working for a telecommunications company full-time and was contacted during my lunch hour to say if I could replace Sharon McGonigal, our lead list candidate. So just a bit of background there quickly, just to clear that up. I would start by saying that the UK Independence Party has put on the agenda, probably for the first time properly in British politics for 50 or 60 years, the EU and the concept of Europe and Britain's relationship with it. Now that's all well and good, and indeed during the Westminster election it was at a higher profile than ever before. What did not happen to the same extent was the issue being raised in Scotland. Now, Scotland has a relationship with the European Union in the same way that Britain does and any other country would have. The point we're making is that if you want to have real powers in Holyrood, real powers in Westminster, wherever it might be, whichever national parliament, you cannot be a member of the European Union and have that scenario. I would point you to the examples of Greece, for example, who elected an anti-austerity government that came in to roll back cuts, reverse the cuts in public spending, reform the education system and everything else. A lot of great aspirations. And within weeks, even having held a referendum on austerity, they were being pushed around by the ECB, the European Central Bank, who run the euro. They were being told by the IMF that they would not be allowed to carry out some of their spending cuts, and, well, reversing the spending cuts within Greece. And they were being told by the EU that they would need to go back and hold another referendum, and that they would need to sign up to what's called the Troika, the combination of financial governments from the ECB, the IMF, and the EU. Greece is but one, Portugal is another, Spain is another, Italy is another, all of whom have had their sovereignty taken away, all of whom are now realising when under pressure that this is the case. I would urge you, whether you support Scottish separation or the Union, to think seriously about the relationship that we have with the European Union. With regard to Holyrood, the powers of fishing, transport, agriculture, these are all directly affected by the European Union. In Greenock, where I've just come from, we had an issue with our shipyard Ferguson's recently, whereby it was very close to closure. Now, amongst other market pressures were EU trade laws that said every single CalMac vessel that we need to build, every single public sector organisation that was going to build, so the Scottish Government, CalMac, of whom, you know, they are big clients of Ferguson's, they are the biggest, has to tender out to every single shipyard in the European Union. Hence the reason that the new ferries for Isla, for Bute, and various other locations were built in Poland and Germany as opposed to here in Scotland, as had always been the case, and it had supported the livelihoods of hundreds and hundreds in my constituency alone of Inverclyde. In Holyrood, we intend to come with a proper reform agenda. On education, we'll open grammar and technical schools to actually give people proper options. You can do the academic route and go to university. If that's not for you, we want to cater for it as well. We will oppose tax rises that would separate the Scottish tax system from the UK. We don't want Scotland to become less competitive. We want to give our young people the best shot at growing up, buying a house, getting a job, and competing and working with those from the rest of the Union. And on that note, we will not be, if we get into Holyrood, we will not be pursuing an agenda of division or of conflict with Westminster. We'll be working with our partners and friends across the United Kingdom for the betterment of all our peoples.
Thank you, Michael. Next up we have Veronika on behalf of the Scottish Greens.
Hello. The Scottish Green Party stands for social justice, environmental justice and peace. So taking social justice first, what does that actually mean? It means that everyone's got the same opportunities no matter where the starting point is. If you're able-bodied, employed and solvent, you've already got advantages, and that means you're going to be disadvantaged if you're disabled, unemployed and poor. And and the Greens aim to even out this inequality by policies such as creating more jobs in clean energy, building more social housing, protecting the NHS and improving public transport. Regarding environmental justice, that means equal access to the Earth's resources, which include clean energy and access to a clean, healthy environment for everyone. And we apply this principle locally, nationally and globally. What we do here affects the rest of the world. We used to have industrial production and pollution in Britain, and what we've done now is we've moved the production, the poor labour conditions, the pollution to elsewhere in the world. So we live in a clean and comfortable environment and someone else is suffering. It's obviously unsustainable for us to have a clean and comfortable environment at the expense of people elsewhere. The policies that support our environmental justice agenda are tackling climate change by investing in alternatives and a complete ban on fracking. The final point I mentioned for the Greens was peace. Arms manufacture and spending in warfare works for the benefit of those who make a profit. It's hard to see how anyone trying to bring up children in a war zone or trying to escape from a war zone with a hazardous journey benefits from that kind of spending. The Scottish Green Party want to scrap Trident renewal, support the international movement for a global ban on nuclear weapons, and make Scotland a force for peace. The Scottish Green Party, with a reasonable presence at Holyrood, will use the powers we do have in Scotland creatively and to their full extent to achieve a more just, greener and peaceful Scotland.
Thank you, Veronika. And the last of our candidates to give the introduction will be Paul O'Kane from Scottish Labour.
Thank you, Raymond, and thank you to Pulse Radio for organising this hustings. It's great the local people can come together and ask questions of their candidates, both for the constituency here, but also for regional list candidates. I'm deeply honoured to be standing in this constituency, the constituency in which I was born and brought up, the constituency where I went to school, but also the constituency where I chose to make my home and was proud to be elected to the local council here in 2012. And it's through that work as a councillor, dealing with people's problems on a daily basis, whether that be the condition of the streets around the local area, or whether it be education and access to education, that is what spurs me on and makes me want to stand for the Scottish Parliament to represent people in this local area. Because it's about local issues and ensuring that we have a local champion in Holyrood who will speak up for the communities of Renfrewshire South, whether that be Barhead and Neilston, or whether that be Johnston, Winwood, Lochwinnock and the other villages. So we need a local champion, we need someone who's going to stand up for local issues. But I'm also here representing the Scottish Labour Party, and I'm asking for both of your votes next Thursday, because the reality is the Scottish Labour Party stand against austerity. We are quite clear that we want to use all of the powers of the Scottish Parliament, all of the new financial powers of the Scottish Parliament, to put an end to the cuts, to bring in more money to spend on education and health. We want to ensure that we are responsible in terms of our environment, that we put an end to fracking. We want to ensure that we've got sustainable public transport going forward. We want to ensure that we build more houses. We do not build enough in terms of social housing. We want to redress that balance. So the Scottish Labour Party, the only party in this election that are being honest about how we would pay for these things, that we would use the economic levers devolved to Holyrood, that we would use the tax powers that we will have to pay for these proposals. So if you want a strong local champion who will go to Holyrood to argue for this area, to stand up for the area in which they grew up in which they currently still live, if you want a party who will stand up against austerity and not simply accept the cuts from Westminster and the Tory cuts, if you want someone who will do things differently, then vote for Paul O'Kane and Scottish Labour next Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, candidates. For those of you who have just come in, I'll explain the format. We've got some people in the audience who have submitted questions. The questions have been submitted through the two local high schools, Barhead High and St Luke's, and also through Pulse Community Radio. So it's a combination of people emailing into the station or sending in questions by text. Now, I hope we've got a couple of runners in the audience with microphones. Could we find Stephen Larkin in the audience? Stephen has got the first question. Stephen, he's up at the back there. So we drew lots before we came out to see where the candidates were sitting, and also to decide the order in which they're answering. So the first question will be answered first by Paul. We'll go along the panel, and for the second question, Robbie will start, and then we'll work our way back along the panel. So Stephen, can we have your question, please?
Local government budgets were cut by an average of 3% this year. Demand for public services remains the same, if not greater, in the current climate. What would your party do to ensure local government is funded properly to enable good quality public services to be delivered to the communities of East Renfrewshire who need them the most? Thank you.
So Paul, what will your party do to ensure that good quality public services will be delivered to the communities of East Renfrewshire?
Well, thank you, Raymond, and thank you, Stephen, for that question. I think it's a very important question. local government has, for the past 9 years, been underfunded by this current government, and we have seen the ongoing council tax freeze, which has been underfunded, which has caused multiple problems in local government in terms of paying for local services. And as a local councillor here in East Renfrewshire, I've seen that day after day in terms of the decisions we've had to make to reduce services that local people rely on. We have undertaken as much as possible to cut where it doesn't hurt in terms of being able to make service reductions within the council. However, obviously now we are faced with additional cuts and additional pressures and having to look at some options which we would rather not do in terms of reducing services. So the Scottish Labour Party are very clear that across Scotland we have to stand with our trade union colleagues and say that enough is enough and that something has to change. And our entire platform in this election is about stopping these cuts and stopping these cuts to local government, because cuts to local councils are cuts to communities, are cuts to libraries, to sports centres, to schools, to all of the things that we rely on. So we need to stop that and we need to do things differently. One of the ways we're going to do that is we need to look at the council tax and the whole issue of the council tax. The council tax is broken. It doesn't work properly, it doesn't give councils the resource that they need, and it isn't fair. And the reality is, for the past 3 elections and over 9 years, the SNP have promised to scrap the council tax. They haven't done that. They've refused to do that. What they are now proposing is to tinker at the edges of the council tax. What Scottish Labour are saying quite clearly is that we will once and for all scrap the unfair council tax, and they will introduce a new property-based tax that will actually save the vast majority of households money and ensure that money can go directly to councils. So I'm quite clear in terms of the Scottish Labour Party that we need to do more for local councils. We need to ensure that services are appropriately funded, and we need to find all the ways of doing that, whether that be the council tax or the grant that comes from government.
Thank you, Paul. Veronika.
As has already been said, public services are essential, and it's essential that they're protected. What the Scottish Green Party intend to do is to reform council tax and to scrap it, as you say, and to replace it with a land value tax. One of the things I would raise, a lot's already been said of the kind of things that I would also say, but it's the cuts to public services are a false economy. You often end up paying out more to support because of the problems that are caused. So it's essential that that's dealt with very quickly.
Thank you, Veronika. Michael?
Any UKIP MSPs would immediately encourage Scotland to undertake a full-scale review of the way we fund council services, so we would join the two parties there in a full-scale review on how we actually do fund the services. Council tax, as it stands, we don't believe is fit for purpose. We would undertake a review of funding systems. We would also undertake a serious review of how we fund the council setups themselves. In Glasgow City Council, there are at least 10 individuals earning six-figure sums. We would question every single council for every single penny that it spends to make sure we get value for money. Our aim, our starting point would always be to protect local services and to get value for money for the taxpayer.
Thank you, Michael. Tom?
Thank you very much. That's a really important question. I think the first thing we have to bear in mind is we are now in the midst of a decade of austerity foisted upon us by a Conservative government we did not elect. Now, if we look at what local government funding has been cut by in England compared to Scotland, that is something that genuinely is egregious. Now, the reality is, you say 3%, when we factor in health and social care spending, it actually works out at 1%. What we have said we will do is we will reform the council tax to make it fairer. This will unlock £100 million, which will be ring-fenced and put into education. But we're going to do more than that. With the new income tax powers, we're going to negotiate and enter discussions with COSLA, with local government, to look at allocating a certain percentage of local income tax receipts to local authorities. That means we can encourage growth, encourage business, and it means that the money generated in local authorities will stay there. There's two particular issues I want to take up that Paul mentioned. He suggested that the council tax had been underfunded. That is arrant nonsense. The Scottish Parliamentary Information Centre, an independent body, stated quite clearly, and not only was the funding met, the funding was exceeded for the council tax. And as far as going into previous elections, we went into the election in 2007 on a commitment to local income tax. It was Paul and other unionist parties in the Parliament who voted against that. And when we ran in 2011, we ran in a commitment to have a commission to go and look at how we would reform the council tax. We met that manifesto commitment. There was a commission, and we're now acting upon that.
you then ignored the recommendations of that commission, Tom. You didn't do what that commission, which was cross-party. A number of your colleagues, including Susan Aiken from Glasgow City Council, sat on that panel and came up with a solution, which you then have said you're not going to carry through. So the reality is, I would ask the people of East Renfrewshire and Renfrewshire whether they feel that the council tax freeze was fully funded when their services were being hit, because the reality on the ground is very different from what you've just described. And I'm sure our trade union colleagues would agree in terms of unison in GMB, and that's why they stood with us at Parliament calling on the Scottish Government to appropriately and adequately fund local government services.
Well, I think the important thing to bear in mind is that this is not a kind of bit of spin. This is a fact from the Scottish Parliament Information Centre, independent facts prepared. The council tax freeze was fully funded, and as regards to the Commission, there was no specific solution. There was a range of issues put forward which parties have acted upon. The SNP have put forward fair and progressive proposals to reform the council tax and to ensure funding can increase over the longer term for local government.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Could we hear Gordon's views on the initial question?
Yes, thank you very much. A few facts. First of all, there was no austerity in 2007 when the council tax freeze was introduced. The austerity did not kick into 2009, so that excuse about austerity simply does not hold water. We have now had a council tax freeze in Scotland for 9 years. If we assume an annual inflation rate averaging 2.5%, that means that councils have got 22.5% less money than they had 9 years ago. Councils do not get rid of people. Well, especially Labour councils don't get rid of people unless they absolutely have to, because that's their base vote. The simple fact of the matter is that every council in Scotland has been squeezed by the council tax freeze. Every single one of them. Some of them, like Glasgow and Aberdeenshire, are £200 million in hock because of the council tax freeze. Now, the proposal we had from COSLA last year, which every party is a member of, except the Conservatives, who said that they will reject that, is that we should have a revaluation and a rebanding of property at exactly the same time. It would seem that they forgot what happened the last time we had a revaluation 25 years ago. The fact of the matter is that not a single party in this country wants to look at local government funding. What we've discovered, even by Nicola Sturgeon today, is that she wants to get rid of 32 councils and wants to reduce them, probably to about 8. What we have in Scotland at the moment is a government which thinks that they're better than anybody else at everything. So they will centralise everything. They have centralised the police. They have centralised the fire service. They are centralising the planning process. They are centralising trade executives. And now they want to centralise local authorities. That is the bottom line. No one wants to talk about how they finance local authorities because they don't want somebody who seems to be in opposition to them, and that is the bottom line.
Thank you, Gordon. Could we have Robbie now on behalf of the Lib Dems?
Certainly. I think that for too long we're trying to tell ourselves this lie that we can get better public services, we can keep increasing demand in public services, for example, with our ageing population, and that we can get all of this and it won't cost us any more. Because, and frankly, we've come to the point where we're beginning to realise that's simply not feasible. We cannot ask local councils to deal with larger numbers, we cannot ask local health services to deal with more patients, and at the same time maintain our same levels of taxation and maintain our council tax freeze. So I'm going to be very honest with you. How do we address the problems in public services and local government? How do we address the pressures they're under financially due to the increased loads? The answer is fairly simple. We pay a bit more tax. That is the long and the short of it. As I said in our party manifesto, we're going to raise local income tax. We're going to raise income tax by a penny. We're going to put a good chunk of that towards councils for the education budgets and for the other services, and we're going to call an end to the council tax freeze. Because while these were many well-intentioned, back in 2007, it's become an unaffordable pressure on our services. So therefore we have to do the honest thing, the simple thing. If we want good quality public services, we all have to pay a little bit more.
Could we find Connor Cunningham, please, who has got a question for the panel? Connor's over there. A roving microphone will be with you shortly.
When I started my university degree, I was in full SAS bursary. I'm now at the lowest level of bursary as my parents' income has marginally increased. This means I've had to take on a lot of student debt. What will you and your party do to deal with this for future students?
Could I ask Robbie to address that question first of all, please?
Certainly, thank you. Thank you, Connor. So, university bursaries and university cost of living. Now, to some extent, I'm sympathetic in a way with the Scottish Government's proposal, current policies here, because for too long we've sort of considered that the important things about university cost, it's all about tuition fees and they're the key issue. But really, the key issue is student maintenance. There is no point, for example, giving you a small bursary of, say, £2,000 when that's not enough to pay for your rent. So therefore, what's more important to consider is the wider package of how much support do students get. We need to be able to give students enough to support to pay for their rent, their living costs. We cannot simply say, well, we've given you here some free cash, it's nowhere near enough what you need, we're going to leave you with that. And so I'm sympathetic to some extent to what the Scottish Government has done, and it's been rebalancing between the bursaries and the loans. But at the same time, we have a situation where the cuts to bursaries have become reasonably quite extreme. I mean, compared to when I started university back in 2007, there has been very large cuts in the allocation there, and that's why we have proposed in our manifesto that we're going to put an extra £40 million per year back into university bursaries. Because there will always be a role, I think, for student loans. I think it's unfortunately unaffordable to go back to the days when you got a full grant, you got all your costs met purely by a grant and not by a loan. But I think we need to find a fair balance between loans, between grants, but we need to make sure that using the amount of money we have and the amount of money that we can free up by our small increases in taxation, that we can use that to ensure not only that people get a fairly generous grant, but they get, in combination, enough money to meet all the costs. And that way people won't be distracted from their degrees by excessive part-time work, they won't have financial stress hanging over them, it will hopefully reduce the dropout rate, and therefore the priority really must be on making sure the overall package of all costs and of all support is enough to keep everybody going through the full term of their degree.
Thank you, Robbie. Gordon, could you give us the Conservative position on that question, please?
Yes, our position in student grants is quite clear, as was announced in our manifesto before the postal votes come out, unlike other parties. We expect students to be paying £1,500 per year for the 4 years of their undergraduate course, amounting to £6,000. By comparison to the rest of the UK, who are paying £9,000 per year, amounting to £36,000. The reason for this is quite simple. The situation in Scotland with people getting free education has been that poor students, as this gentleman has indicated, don't get the education that they're supposed to get. And at the same time, the Scottish Government has financed this by getting rid of 142,000 further education places which are not at university. We think these figures don't stack up. We think the university is not being properly financed and further education colleges are certainly not being financed, and so we think there should be the imposition of a grant of which will be £1,500 per year.
Thank you, Gordon. Tom, I'm sure you'll have a response to that.
I'll leave that to later, respond to Connor's question. Thank you very much for that question. I appreciate this must be having, due to your parents' income rising, it being quite a difficult situation to be in and to suddenly find yourself losing out. And it's unfortunate, of course, that that's happened. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, there has to be a threshold set somewhere, and that's just, it's going to be a consequence. It's generally unfortunate that has happened. I can appreciate your frustration. As I say, one of the things that we have to bear in mind is that in terms of actually student debt, in Scotland it has the lowest student debt, average student debt of anywhere in the UK. And the reason we do have that as the case is because we're not charging students £9,000 a year to go to university. The average student in Scotland is 27 grand better off by the time they actually graduate. And I say, abolishing tuition fees, it was one of the sort of reasons many years ago why I joined the SNP, that commitment that education should be based on the ability to learn, not on the ability to pay. And we're absolutely committed to maintaining that, because the reality is In the past, Labour and Liberal Democrats have went into elections saying we're not going to introduce tuition fees, and they have. And as you've just heard, the Conservatives want to start charging students £1,500 a year, and believe me, that will just be the start of it. So I can make this commitment to you right now. We will, an SNP government will keep tuition free.
And would you address Gordon's point about the loss of college places? Would you like to say something on that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we began a comprehensive programme of reform of our colleges, that has involved investing over £530 million into college estates, as anyone who's looked around our college campuses will see. But our other priority has been shifting the focus in colleges towards full-time courses that can actually lead on to employment. Because fundamentally, that's what we want. The numbers that Gordon refers to, the vast majority of them come from short-term courses and leisure courses that lead to no qualification. And indeed, short-term courses which do lead to qualifications have been preserved. That is the reality of the situation. And this has been the right decision to take in tough financial times, because we want to be equipping young people with the skills necessary, not just for the jobs of today, but for the jobs of tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Michael?
Well, I would start by saying that UKIP's position across the United Kingdom is with a very long-term goal as it stands to actually reduce and eventually abolish tuition fees across the UK. This would be done in our ideal world by a departure from the European Union and the funds that would release. But the intention, and indeed it was detailed in our manifesto commitments last year, was to reduce tuition fees in England and Wales, because that's what Westminster was voting on. In Scotland, we would not reverse the policy of free tuition. With regard to the question more specifically, we would recognise you need to have a cut-off point. It's not sustainable to have a situation where you provide grants and bursaries of the same level, of a generous level, to everyone. It is difficult. It's not a decision that will be taken lightly. If we were to have UKIP MSPs in place, we would be raising questions about how the system is funded, and that would include proposals such as looking at the possibility of a graduation tax, or something that would take the pressure off you at this stage. You could then put back into the system later. With this in mind, we do have a pledge to basically relieve the pressure on those who have had to take on student debt, who have had to take on loans as a result. So we would be raising the level at which that is paid back. We would also be introducing grant programs, special grant programs with increased payments and increased incentives for crucial areas such as nursing, technology, IT, various sectors in which the UK does lack skilled workers and badly needs this generation to provide. Of course, that could vary. In future it could be something else, where there is a shortage of skilled workers. So we would say that there are a lot of questions to be asked about how the system is funded. You need to look at them in a way that gives everyone a fair shout and gives everyone a fair chance. And I would come back to the point, I do have a number of friends facing a similar position to yours. I've been asked the question several times what we would do. We would come at it from a realistic point of view. You have to fund this in a way that's sustainable. At the same time, you can work it to your advantage and get the system in place whereby the economy and the government would recoup the benefits of investing in young people later down the line.
Thank you, Michael. Veronika, could I ask for your response?
This is part of the inequality I was talking about evening up in my opening statement. If you're clever enough to go to university, you should be able to do so without being held back by financial concerns. And that, I was lucky enough to get my free education. I got 5 years of free education. And as a result, you become a graduate, you put something back into society. You paid income tax, and that pays towards what happened at the start. It's an investment in the future, and the Greens recognise that, and that's the situation we want. We want you to be going to university without paying fees and without having a loan to pay off once you graduate.
Thank you, Veronika. Paul?
Thank you, Connor, for the question, and I think we have to look at this in the round and look at the cuts that have been made to student support, because there's no point in having a free place at university if you can't afford to be at university. So the reality is Scottish Labour are going to look at the bursary system and look at how we can increase the thresholds and top up in terms of the bursaries that have been cut, and we're going to do that through our measures on taxation around the penny on income tax. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that care leavers very often don't get the opportunity to go to university because of a lack of support. So we're quite clear that we'll give a full bursary to anyone leaving care who's looked after, who wants to go to university, and support them through the process. Just if I could come back on some of the things we've heard already, I think we're in the realms of revisionist history already. The reality is tuition fees were abolished by a Labour and Liberal Democrat Scottish executive not so long ago. The other reality is that the SNP promised that they were going to abolish student debt. I mean, that was a promise from the SNP government. We will abolish student debt. We're now seeing issues like Connor's described being faced every day. And if I can just briefly on college places, I think it's absolutely ridiculous to just brush aside 142,000 college places as if part-time courses don't matter. Those part-time courses are very often people returning to college, returning to learning, very often women who've had children returning to learning, people with additional support needs who I work with, who can't get the places at college to do life skills, which will eventually build them up to go for employment. These college courses are vital and have been slashed, and it's not fair, and we need to redress that balance.
Tom, you'd like to come back on Paul's point there?
Yeah, firstly, I didn't say part-time courses, just for, as I said, short courses and leisure programmes. In terms of a full-time equivalent, the SNP committed to 116,000 places in the manifesto in 2011. We delivered 119,000. And I'm sorry, in terms of revisionism, a graduate endowment, a graduate tax is just tuition fees by the back door. Calling it something else doesn't change what it is. The Labour Party under Tony Blair introduced tuition fees. They increased under the Labour Party, and if the people of Scotland had voted for Labour in 2007, we would still have tuition fees in Scotland.
Could I ask Connor if you'd like to respond, if you get anything you'd like to say to that question, and then if not Connor, then the gentleman at the front there with the glasses. Connor got... Question from the gentleman sitting there.
Thanks very much. I have to point out to you that one of the very first actions or the very first session of the Scottish Parliament, which was brought in by a Labour government after a referendum, was to abolish tuition fees in Scotland. It was Donald Dew that brought it in. So please, if you're going to talk history, be a wee bit more accurate. And I've got to say, it's just sitting here listening to how wonderful your education policy is. It's fail all the way around the line. Attainment levels, the gap in attainment levels in certain parts of this country are a disgrace. They're getting worse. You've been in power for 9 years and you've failed to tackle them. You're coming up with a plan now, but you haven't done it over the last 9 years. And when you talk about the college places, I've got news for you. Trade bodies have been complaining about the lack of courses for apprentices in the building trade because of some of the courses you cut. Go to John Wheatley College, go to other colleges throughout Scotland, and they'll tell you the story. And when it comes to student debt, you went to the country last time and said you will reduce student debt. You were applauded by that by the NUS at the time. You have failed student debt. When you say that the indebtedness among students in Scotland is less than England, that is no crumb of comfort to any poor student that's struggling. And I've got to say to you, one of the biggest assets the Scottish Government have got it on their books at this moment in time is the student loan debt book. So students are in debt and you fail them. So as far as I'm concerned, as a parent, sit and listen to you, it's 9 years of education failure.
Well, Tom responds to that question. Carolyn, could you go to that gentleman sitting over there?
Very briefly, I don't want to take up, I appreciate I've spoken quite a lot. Fundamentally, pass marks are up. There are more people going to university in Scotland. Now, I do not deny for one moment there is work to be done. The attainment gap is far too high. And I appreciate that, and that's why we have the best bursary system for further education in the UK. It's why we delivered 25,000 modern apprenticeships a year, and we're going to increase that to 30,000 a year by the end of this Parliament. We are contributing. I appreciate there's challenges, there's difficulties, but in the specific point of the attainment gap, we are committing £750 million to closing the attainment gap. So I'm not here to go and say things are perfect. There's always work to be done, but we recognise these challenges, we recognise these problems. There's a problem. We have addressing that problem. Stephen. I'll give you. I'll give you the very first fundamental one. I said we abolish tuition fees so students aren't saddled with 9 visits. I'm sorry, but there is revisionist history. You're charging people to go to university. Basically, if someone has to go to university and they're having to pay for it, that is a fee. That is a charge. You can call it whatever you want. It is still a fee.
Right, okay, let's move on. There's a gentleman over there with a question. One more question on this and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Basically, my question is more for you, Gordon. I already have my degree. I've graduated from UWS in Paisley. You want to charge me £6,000 at the well, you would have wanted to charge me £6,000 at the end of my education. My education was free. I already have £6,000 worth of debt. Why would I now want to double that under your plans?
The £6,000 debt that you've got at the moment is exactly why we worked it out at £1,500 per year. Yes, you would still have the £6,000 of debt, but the fact of the matter is it would be up front as opposed to through the back door, as this gentleman has indicated here. Well, but in comparison to a student in England, it's still 3 times less than they're paying.
Okay, we're going over all ground. Let's move on to the next question. Well, I think we've done enough on this one, Tom. Right, so the next question has been emailed in. Paul, you're going to answer this one. Emailed in by a listener to Pulse. It's from Elizabeth Kerr, who says, panellists, would you agree that the appointment of so-called state guardians for every child in Scotland undermines the role of parenting and hands too much power to the state? So does the role of the state guardian undermine the role of parenting and hand too much power to the state? Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, and thanks to Elizabeth if she's listening to the question. The reality is an in-person scheme, when it was first introduced, it looked on the face of the bill like it could be a positive change, that we could use it in a positive manner to have a light touch intervention into children who need it. However, the legislation, like many of the acts brought in by this current SNP government, is a complete disarray. We have professional bodies who say that the law is unworkable. We have the teaching unions, we have the Union of Social Workers, we have health visitors up in arms and leaving the profession actually in their droves from a health visitor point of view because of the legislation. So what we need to do is we need to pause, and the Scottish Government should be big enough to listen to the concerns and the criticism that's out there. Take a pause in this legislation. Say that we don't know how it's going to be implemented, we don't know if it's going to work. Let the Children's Commissioner, Tam Bailey, have a full review of the scheme, and then we need to come back around the table and look at whether or not this is going to actually have any positive impact on the children and young people of Scotland. The reality is we have excellent social work teams throughout our local authorities. We have excellent teachers who to some extent are already doing these roles. You would already expect the pastoral support from teachers in schools. You would already expect the interventions to come from social workers when they're required. You don't expect everyone to require or need a named person at every stage of their development. So we really need to pause here and look again at this legislation, because I think we could end up doing more harm than good.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Veronika, what's your view on that?
My personal experience of child protection issues suggests that a single point of contact can be really important. The Greens supported this law in principle, but we also agree that there are too many problems with it, and we need to have a pause and look at how it's actually going to work.
Okay. Michael?
We have never supported in principle the legislation we proposed when it was first drawn up, for the reasons that are now becoming apparent. As has already been touched upon, religious groups, teachers, carers, trade unionists and lawyers are all raising concerns about the legislation. We have never said pause either. We've said stop, go back, look at the plans for how you enforce child protection and do it properly, and do it in a way that isn't going to potentially undermine civil liberties and cause such infringement as well upon so many beliefs and so many groups of people. It's brought together a coalition of Christians, of Muslims, of Jews, of trade unionists, of lawyers, of just about everyone who could be affected by it, raising questions, concerns. I have heard very little in favour of the proposals, and we have said that we will and we will repeal the legislation if we have UKIP MSPs in Holyrood.
Thank you, Michael. Perhaps Tom will now say something in favour of the named person proposal.
How did you know? Thank you very much. No, I appreciate this is an issue that has caused a lot of concern. A lot of people have written to me about it. And unfortunately there has been a tremendous amount of scaremongering and misinformation relating to named persons. Named persons is fundamentally it's a process of bringing a lot of services together under one person. It's about simplifying a process. And it's also about, some of the most vulnerable, the people who this is designed for, some of the most vulnerable children in society. That's what we're actually talking about. This talk of it being this sort of totalitarian measure, snoopers and all the rest of it, does a disservice to this serious piece of legislation. This is about some of the most vulnerable children in society. That's why organisations like Burrows and other charities back named person. Now, I appreciate there's concerns, and it's important that we listen and that concerns are addressed. But I think it's also important to recognise that this does have the backing of children's charities and it should be implemented. And I, for one, have to say I'm disappointed to see some parties who were in favour of it and supported it are now backtracking on it. But we supported named persons, and that is where I stand on the matter.
Okay. Gordon, would you like to respond?
Well, the first thing I'd like to take issue with is the use of the term state guardian. This has nothing whatsoever to do with the British state. This is about the SNP government thinking that they can look after your kids better than you can. It is fatuous. Now, the simple fact of the matter is, we're talking about this named person scheme as if health visitors, social workers and police never spoke to each other before. This has been a feature of at-risk children since the 1960s. Why does it require a named person scheme for everybody? Because effectively what it's saying is that social workers aren't professional enough, that health visitors aren't professional enough, that teachers aren't professional enough, and that police officers aren't professional enough to see where the at-risk children are. The legislation as it stands is an absurdity, and it can't stand.
Thank you, Gordon. Robbie?
Firstly, this is not in any ways an attack on social workers and police and very professionals in the field. And named person is fundamentally a good concept. And we as Liberal Democrats, we support it in that regard. That there are many useful advantages to parents, children have a single point of contact to address their issues throughout growing up. And this is a policy that is supported by all the large and influential children's charities. It's a perfectly sensible idea to increase the linking up between existing services. For example, this sort of outcry that the named person is going to somehow come in and take control of your children, when the named person is likely to be your health visitor when the child is young, your primary school teacher. They're likely to be, when we get older, they're likely to be the guidance teacher in secondary school. This is just an integration of a restructuring of the various support services that already exist. It's fair to say there are some, always as with policies, catches implementation. And I am not going to say, well, having not in fact read the endless documents on the subject, that in every part of it, every part of the implementation is likely to be a great success. But in principle, absolutely in favour of integration of social care, of support, of single points of contact. These are all good basic principles, and with the slight caveats of some implementation details, yes, we support the named person programme.
Your party position, Robbie, is to keep the named person legislation under review. So what would that look like?
So again, it's the issue of, as some of the other panellists have mentioned, of the implementation of these issues. I will honestly say I'm not a great expert in children's protection, and I bow to my other colleagues in the party who have covered this in their portfolios. But for this, restate that the principle, absolutely, some of the technical details of implementation, some of the individual procedures may well need cause for some review, but in general, the concept as a whole should be supported. We should try and work through these details with constructive criticism, but not sort of discarding the baby with the bathwater in this case.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. Right, gentleman over there wants to come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My memory of this legislation as it went through Holyrood is that it was not opposed by Labour, it was not opposed by Conservatives, it was not opposed by Lib Dems. In fact, I'm pretty sure there were some Labour and some Lib Dems who actually supported it. And there might even have been some Conservatives. I would like to know, Mr. Chairman, why the people have changed their mind.
Paul, could you answer that question?
I think I alluded to it when we supported the bill in its stages going through Holyrood. It looked like a bill that could have positive changes. The problem is the implementation of this bill. The guidance, for example, is vastly confusing. I work for a learning disability charity. The reality is it doesn't tell us. We would have thought that a child would have to have one plan in place due to this one person being responsible, therefore one plan for all the services required. That's not the case. Child will still have multiple plans, for example. We're not clear on will they have a role in helping the diagnosis of young people with a learning disability. That's not clear. So there are too many gaps now in terms of the delivery and implementation of this. That's why I have said we need to have a pause and we need the Children's Commissioner to look at the detail of this legislation and the guidance that underpins it, because legislation can only go so far. It's the guidance that professionals have to work to that will underpin the actual delivery of this. So we need to look at that quite clearly.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Could you take another one? Could you have the gentleman with the blue jumper? And then we're going to have to move on quickly because we're running out of time.
Thank you. I am a social worker and work in child protection. In theory, this legislation should have helped us do our job swifter and better. What it's done is put another level of bureaucracy on the overworked professionals who are charged with keeping our children and young people safe and cared for. So the legislation is confusing, it's all over the place in the implementation. We're going to have 32 different versions of this throughout the country. There is no agreed way this is to be implemented, and the right course of action would be to pause and see how do we support the professionals that we charge to keep our children safe to do this properly.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to move on because we are running out of time. Is Marion Craig in the audience? Marion's over there. Marion's got a question for the panel. And Robbie, I believe it's your turn to answer first.
If elected, how will you ensure the interests of the LGBT people are represented in the Scottish Parliament?
Robbie.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that question. Thank you. And so
that's all the panels to keep their answers reasonably brief on this because we are running out of time.
Do my best. So, I'd like to say, as Liberal Democrats, we have always had believed very strongly on issues of equality, particularly LGBT equality. We were the first party in Scotland to have been in favour of equal marriage back in 2010. I remember I was there at the party conference when we passed that. Very happy about that. And we led on that, for example, as you saw in the coalition with the Conservatives across the UK. Now, particularly for the things we can do in the next term of the Scottish Parliament, our real focus is on support for the LGBT pupils in schools. And that's often an area where there's a lot of stigma, there can be a lot of bullying. It is an issue where there are the social clique of being at school is bad enough, without being targeted as a minority in that sense. And unfortunately, one of the issues is that too many schools, too many teachers, too many other staff in schools aren't equipped. They don't have the training and the experience to try and address these concerns. So we're proposing in our manifesto that we will have training, again, anti-LGBT bullying training for every teacher in Scotland. We're going to roll that out across the country because there are some schools that do a fabulous job at encouraging LGBT pupils, at cracking down on bullying, and there are others, unfortunately, that really don't, and lead to this very unhappy period. So that's our top priority for the next election.
As far as Robbie's concerned. Gordon.
Well, I would have to say I think the Scottish Conservatives' position in this matter is second to none, given that our leader has been a member of the LGBT community and has been awarded as the most influential LGBT person in Scotland 3 years on the trot. So I don't think we can be embarrassed about anything regarding LGBT in the Scottish Parliament, nor indeed down at Westminster, where David Cameron, in the teeth of considerable opposition, introduced gay marriage.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Tom.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question, Marion. It's nice to actually meet you at last. This is an issue actually very close to my heart for a number of reasons. I'm very proud of the SNP's record. I'm proud it was an SNP government that introduced equal marriage in Scotland, and I'm proud it's under an SNP government that Scotland has become one of the best places in the world to live if you're LGBT. But it's not just LGBT, it's LGBTI. And I'm proud that Nicola Sturgeon has set out that a re-elected SNP government will give enhanced rights for people who identify as transgender or non-binary. But can I say something? We see in this issue, we're all united on it. We all believe in it. And I think our goal isn't just to make Scotland one of the best places in the world to live, if you're LGBTI, but to make it the best place.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Michael, quickly.
I would start by coming at this from a different angle, as you maybe would expect. We did, as a party, oppose the legislation put forward by David Cameron for equal marriage. I would clarify that now the legislation has passed, our position is not to reverse it. We would not want to take that away from people who have been given equal marriage. We would accept the legislation, we accept the issue as settled. Our position on any issue of equality, so I take that across the board, it can be race, it can be gender, it can be sexual preference, it doesn't matter. Our position is always to come back to a word, meritocracy. If you're good at something, you get the job. If you're intelligent, you get onto the course. If it doesn't matter. We don't see colour, we don't see gender, we don't see race, and that is the policy we would apply across all aspects of the equality debate. So any legislation in Holyrood that we felt was going to enhance that, we would support. Anything we didn't, we would oppose. We would say that we do feel strongly about protecting the rights of religious groups and making sure that there is cohesion within this area, not divisiveness. As someone observing from a Christian standpoint, I would say that the debate has gone reasonably well throughout the last 5 or 6 years. I would say that there has been an acceptance of religious opinion, but that needs to continue. By the same token, there does need to continue to be progress in the areas of accepting all people, regardless of their backgrounds.
Thank you. Veronika.
We have a good history of challenging stereotypes and including everyone, and it's in keeping with our policies of equality, and I just want to point out that the Conservatives don't have the monopoly on LGBT leaders to the party.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Thank you. I'm sure we're all breathing a sigh of relief that UKIP won't repeal the Equal Marriage Act. That's good to know. I think the reality is I'm very proud of the work that the Labour Party has done over the years to advance LGBT equality, whether that was repealing Section 28 or introducing civil partnerships or adoption rights for gay people or trans rights. I'm really proud of what we've done, and we'll continue to do that. And we laid out in our manifesto today the priority we're going to place on LGBTI education within schools and ensuring that there are safe spaces so that any young person who is inquiring about their sexuality or questioning their sexuality have a safe space to do that, and we'll continue to support that.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to come back on the panel? Yep, the microphone is making its way to you at the moment, Marion.
Got a question for Tom Arthur. So my local councillor, Andy Doig, I'm sure people have heard of him. He was an SNP councillor and he was actually the candidate for the SNP Renfrewshire South until he was suspended for sending a homophobic email, which he said was a spoof press release. I'd like to ask Tom directly, do you condemn Andy Doig's disgraceful behaviour?
Thank you very much. What Andy Doig said was absolutely and utterly unacceptable, and it was completely the right thing. He lost his candidacy, that he was suspended from the council, that he lost his position in government boards, and he was given a suspension from the SNP. That was absolutely the right thing to do. It was incredibly offensive. His attempts to pass it off were crass, and I have to say, given that the homophobic smear he made was against my good Renfrewshire colleague of mine, Derek Mackay, and myself, not only was it incredibly offensive, it was incredibly hurtful. So, yes.
Tom, can I just ask, why then was Andy Doig reinstated at Renfrewshire Council this morning to the leadership board of Renfrewshire Council, and why was he present at your campaign launch, if you disagree with what he said?
Andy Doig attended that in his capacity as an SNP councillor. That was a matter taken by the party's disciplinary committee, and he was reinstated. And he attended that SNP event in his capacity as an SNP councillor.
Michael, you got something you'd like to say on that?
I would come back on this point because when I was making my remarks on this issue, I noticed a few people perhaps shaking their heads at me because you perhaps have, we have an image whereby people have misread our points on this, and I would come back and say that our leader in Scotland, David Coburn, is gay himself, and he was one of the first to condemn the comments that were made. Those comments completely undermine the point I just made. whereby we say we want a society that accepts all people from all backgrounds, and we want a society where all people from all backgrounds can get on. The kind of sentiment expressed by Mr. Doig did not tie in with that at all, and we were one of the first to condemn it on the grounds that our leader himself is gay and in a relationship with a man.
Okay, thank you. Well, a couple of more quick questions, then we'll finish up. Could we have Stephen Wilson? Is Stephen in the audience? And could I ask the panel members to answer this as briefly as they can? Two more questions, then we'll wind up.
Yeah. With regards to education, can you promise to reverse the trend of lowering the numbers of teachers in nursery classes that is being carried out recently? Thank you.
Is it Robbie first in this? I've lost.
I think it's me.
It's Paul, sorry.
Thanks for that question, Stephen. I know this has been a hot topic locally because we, as a council, made a decision to review our staffing structures in nurseries, obviously due to the continued pressures we've had in terms of funding, which we related earlier. The reality is we still do have teachers in all of our nurseries. They are supported by child development officers who are now trained to the BA level, degree level. However, we do need to look at the teaching profession as a whole. I mean, not just nurseries, but there are now 4,000 fewer teachers in our classrooms across Scotland, and we need to look at how we appropriately funding education to ensure that we can protect posts, because the reality is you've got to make choices. When cuts come, you know, from the Scottish Government, you've got to make choices on the local level, and the reality is we need to invest in education. That's why we've said up front, quite clear, we want to ask people to pay a penny more on the income tax so that we can invest in education, so that we can protect jobs, and we can continue to invest in nursery education and primary education and all of the education that we have here in Scotland.
Okay, Veronika?
Brief answer, yes, we believe there should be highly qualified teachers in nurseries.
Thank you, that was brief. Michael?
Quick points, we would say we don't want to see an increase in class sizes. We do not want to see another teacher. We don't want to see another reduction in that figure, even just by one. And as mentioned earlier, we would be looking long term at making sure that there were more teachers by allowing those studying education and studying to become a teacher further support with their studies.
Tom?
I'll keep this brief as I'm aware we're running out of time. The SNP is committed to expanding investment in early years.
Thank you. Gordon?
Well, if they're intending to invest in early years, they better start putting the money up front as opposed to pulling it out as they're doing at the present. Because the simple fact of the matter is, next year, this council, and we're a little council, has to find £7.5 million worth of cuts. And whether we like it or not, the bulk of our budget goes in education, 54%. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out where the cuts are going to hit.
Okay. Robbie?
And answer the question, absolutely. We're going to back nurseries, we're back nursery teachers. We're going to invest £500 million into education, so yes.
Thank you for that very passionate input there, Ewan. Apologies to anyone who is in the audience and has got a question and hasn't had a chance to answer it. We're going to finish with one question. I'd like the panellists to answer it as briefly as they can, and then they're going to give a quick summing up. And the question has been emailed in to Pulse from Aidan Charles, who I'm guessing isn't here this evening. And the question is, Robbie, I'd like you to answer first. Should politicians be compelled to publish their tax returns? Should politicians be compelled to publish their tax returns? As quickly as you can.
Quickly as can. No. I appreciate that politicians obviously should not be, avoiding their taxes, but I don't think that sort of intensive, overbearing scrutiny on politicians is ultimately a good thing.
Okay, thank you, Robbie. Gordon?
Well, the bottom line is, the thing I've been talking about here is publishing of tax returns. Well, all of my tax returns are done by HMRC, and they're not allowed to publish anything because it's illegal. So are we saying that those who actually write a tax return should publish it, but those who pay all their money to HMRC shouldn't? What's the answer?
Okay, Tom?
I think it's of course correct, all politicians have to be accountable for public money, and where private interest can impact upon their role in office, that of course must be declared. But I don't know if we need to go down the road of compelling politicians to publish their own personal tax returns.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
I would agree. I don't think it's the best plan in the long term. I think it would set a precedent for anyone who wanted to get involved in public service that they would need to be very forthcoming with such personal details, as has already been pointed out, have been private or personal for a long time. So I think it sets a precedent that would be damaging for public service in the long term.
Thank you. Veronika?
I think it's a sad state of affairs that we're even asking that question, that we can't trust our politicians. In my case, I'd be perfectly happy to publish my tax return if that's what's needed.
Oh.
Yeah, I think we need to have a strict way of communicating the expenses, for example, that are paid to MSPs and others, but I certainly wouldn't have any problem publishing my tax return. Kes Dugdale, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, was the first person to do it, but I think Veronika's right. I think it's a sad state of affairs when we actually have to ask, what and are you paying tax in this country?
Okay. Thanks very much for that, panelists. Anyone like to come back on that question, a supplementary question about tax returns? Just the Tories, says the gentleman at the front. Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to ask the panellists to sum up as quickly as they can why they should get your vote next week. And we're going to reverse the order that we started with. So Paul is going to start off. Could I ask you to be as brief as you can? Paul?
Sure, I will be, Raymond. Can I just say thank you to everyone at Pulse for organising this event, and thank you to all you for coming along and for all the questions, which I think gave a good spirited and good natured debate. But next week we've got a choice here in Renfrewshire South. We've got the choice to stand up for public services, to call for an end to austerity, to work to stop the cuts, to choose our schools and our hospitals to ensure that they're well funded and that we can stop these cuts that are coming from the SNP and from the Tories. So you've got a choice next week. I'm asking you to vote for a local candidate, someone who has lived and worked all their days here in Renfrewshire South and particularly in this area, and someone who has a track record of delivering, whether that be in the local council, taking up issues for local people, or whether that be in terms of national campaigning. I think what we want to see and what local people want, regardless of what party badge you're wearing, they want to know that their elected members are available, they're accessible, that they hold regular surgeries, that they will answer your inquiries, that they will work as hard as they can, whether you voted for them or not, to deliver for the community in which they represent. So I can give you that guarantee now that I will work every single day for Renfrewshire South, that I will always stand up for our interests, that I will be our person in the Scottish Parliament. I won't be the Scottish Government's voice in this area. And I want to protect, most importantly, our schools, because they are the great jewel in the crown here in this area, and we need to ensure that we continue to invest in them. I also want to protect our local hospital, the RAH, from further cuts and ensure that it continues to offer a great service and the staff continue to be well supported there. So on a local level, I'm asking for your trust to be a strong local representative, and on a national level, I'm asking you to vote Scottish Labour, to choose kids, not cuts, and put an end to austerity.
Thank you, Paul. Veronika.
Next Thursday or before, if you've got a postal vote, you'll be given 2 ballot papers. And the lilac one is for your constituency vote. Greens aren't standing in this constituency. We're standing on the list. The peach ballot paper is for your regional vote, and that's the list vote. The West of Scotland region stretches along the coast from north of Helensburgh right down south to Irvine and beyond, and it curves around Glasgow to the east. And in that whole region, there's going to be 7 representatives that will be elected from a number of parties, and those parties can include the Greens. If you vote for 2 different parties with the 2 papers, that doesn't mean you're splitting your vote, it doesn't mean you're expressing a second preference. It's better than that. You can vote for your 2 favourite parties. And no matter what you use your constituency vote for, if you vote for the Scottish Green Party on your peach ballot paper, there's a likelihood of a good representation of the Greens in the next Scottish Parliament. With a good number of Greens elected, we should be the second biggest party. We'll be pushing this SNP towards greener policies such as banning fracking completely. And we'll be working with the government on policies that all the Scots want, like getting rid of Trident. A good number of Green MSPs will push the government to use the powers we do have in Scotland to get the Scotland we want. And we'll make Holyrood bolder, Scotland greener, and more peaceful and more equal.
Thank you, Veronika. Michael, could you sum up for UKIP?
Well, I would start by thanking the organisers once again. It's a very good idea to be engaging at this level, and I must say for Holyrood it is very important, particularly with the new powers coming and with the recent debates in Scotland, that we do have scrutiny, that we have debate, and tonight has been very encouraging to see the number of young people turn up as well. I would, as an aside, say that when I got involved in politics 2 years ago, the choice was not the one that everyone expected me to take. There were a number of raised eyebrows, a number of abusive comments, and a number of rather startled school teachers who all were questioning my decision. My point I would make to you is, regardless of your political persuasion or beliefs or whatever it may be, if you do feel inclined to get involved, do. And don't let them tell you that you're too young or you're too inexperienced or whatever it may be, because it isn't worth listening. So I would say that as an aside tonight, regardless of your political persuasion, keep doing what you're doing. You've come along tonight and you've listened. take the views that you've found convincing and act on them. And I would say that by voting, through activism, whatever it may be, because Scotland, regardless of who wins this election, does need an engaged society and an engaged population, and that was one of the benefits of the referendum that came about. People are engaged like never before. For UKIP, if you put us into Holyrood, our motto is shake up Holyrood. We will express an alternative opinion to the Scottish establishment that has existed for years and years in that Parliament. The SNP and the Tories worked together from 2007. The Labour and Liberal Democrat coalitions together from 1999. We've seen a cosy consensus over the EU and a number of other fields. If you put UKIP MSPs into that Parliament, we will stand up for independent voices, we will stand up for independent thinking, common sense policies, and we will make sure to question everything that the Scottish Government does and oppose anything that we feel would be a detriment to the progress of Scotland and the United Kingdom.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Tom.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Pulse again, and thank all my fellow candidates, and thank all of you for sticking around. I appreciate we're now very much in extra time, so I'll keep this brief. Look, next week you're going to have a choice to make. You're going to be choosing who you want to represent you in the Scottish Parliament, and you're going to be choosing who you want to be in government for the next 5 years. It's a big decision to take, and I can really appreciate that, you know, there's a lot to think about after this evening. I'm standing in Renfrewshire South because this is home for me. I was born locally, I was brought up here. My parents have lived in this area for over whole life, as have their parents going back many, many generations. I care deeply about this area, and I'm fundamentally running because I want to make a difference. As I said in my opening remarks, I think we have tremendous potential here. There's so much that we could do if we just had a bit of vision, a bit of ambition. And I think, just to echo comments that were made, one thing that struck me in this campaign about speaking to so many people is there's still so many people out there who are disillusioned with politics. They've lost their faith in politics. They're tired of the sniping and the point scoring and the sort of cheap jibes and all the rest of it. So my commitment is I want to do the best for this constituency. I will be available, accessible, and all the things you would expect from an MSP, regular surgeries, etc. But more than that, I want to bring people together, because I believe that by working together, we can make Renfrewshire South better. And in voting for me, you're not just voting for me, you're voting for an SNP government, a government that has transformed Scotland, a government where every household in Renfrewshire South and across Scotland has benefited from SNP policies. So if you want to see a strong local representative, if you want to see record funding for a health service, if you want to see a transformation in childcare, then you want to see Nicola Sturgeon back as First Minister, then please give both votes to the SNP.
Thank you, Tom. Gordon.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Pulse 98.4 for inviting us here this evening, and also thank you to you for being a very lively audience with very good questions. I think what's become obvious to all of us this evening is that the SNP is still a pressure group that's very good at campaigning, but not yet a serious political party. Unfortunately, the Labour Party is a serious political party which is turning itself into a pressure group which is no very good at campaigning. So that is a choice you have got between two pressure groups. Is this what you actually want for a government in Scotland? Or do you want a serious political party, the Conservatives? We are the only party this evening who made a commitment that there will be £1,500 that you'll need to pay each year for students. From the rest of them, we held bold statements about increasing income tax. And the simple fact of the matter is they can make these bold statements because they know they're never going to have to implement them. However, when it came to council tax, suddenly they were all terribly wishy-washy about we must hold an inquiry about this and we must look at this, because they will have to implement them. So it's time to get serious, and get serious with a serious political party, the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
Thank you, Gordon. And could we have Robbie summing up for the Lib Dems?
Thank you, and thank you to our hosts, and thank you our fine audience for your attention this evening. So I'm not going to I'm hoping not to go and critique our various fellow candidates here who are all people who are well-intentioned and trying to do the best thing for the people in the local area. And everyone who's involved in the political system should be applauded for their interest in that regard. What I would like to do instead is very briefly sum up the key positive policies that I would want you to vote Liberal Democrat for next Tuesday, in fact, Thursday. Clearly, you've been here too long. So I'm asking everyone in the country to contribute a little bit more money so we can improve our public services. We need to invest in our schools and the colleges to reverse our years of cuts so everyone can have the opportunity they need. We need to bring down the gap between the rich and the poor in our education. It's a scandal that you go 3 miles from one school to another and you see the pass rates double or half depending on which side you're on. We need the best healthcare available. So we have to invest in the NHS, support mental health, integrate mental health services much better into our wider healthcare. That involves support mental health professionals in A&E. We need to support our doctors by reducing the bureaucracy and trying to reduce the falling doctors' numbers. We need to protect our civil liberties, so that means cracking down on the excessive use of stop and search, particularly in young people. We need to crack down on the regular use of armed police for general day-to-day domestic policing. We need to support the environment. We need to tackle fuel poverty. We need to build 50,000 houses for social rent, so we can tackle homelessness, high rents, and the poor quality of housing. And the thing is, with just five MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, the Liberal Democrats have done a punch above our weight and a really fine job in scrutinising the government on issues such as police, such as the Police Scotland centralisation, on the cuts to colleges, on cuts to nursery education. We have been a powerful force holding the government to account on these important issues, and that's with just 5 MSPs. So what we would like to ask you for tonight is for you to give us a couple more MSPs so we can do more of this and do a better job of that. So that's why Scotland needs these strong Liberal voices, these very effective questioning voices, calling the government to account, and that's why I need you all here to go out next week and elect a Liberal Democrat MSP for the West of Scotland region.
Thank you, Robbie. I'd like to, all that remains for this evening is to thank our panellists for having such a civilised and interesting debate. Thanks to the audience for some interesting questions and inputs. I'd like to remind you all, if you want to hear this debate again, you'll be able to hear it tomorrow night on Pulse 98.4 Community Radio. You can listen to it on your radio on 98.4 or online at pulseonair.co.uk. And all that remains for me to say is good night from Neilston. Thank you everyone for coming along.
Thanks to the Chair.